Tell them what's going on. Augustus. That those are the wrong lines. Tell them again. Follow the script. So my actor, he struggles with his lines sometimes, and what he was trying to say is that we're going to talk about how is your credit card information protected, or at least what's the foundation for protecting our credit card information. We're going to talk about that in more detail and more depth. So in a prior video, I had talked about how PCI stands for Payment Card Industry, and there is something called PCI-DSS compliance. So whenever you swipe your credit card, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to make sure that, your information hopefully does not get out there. And of course, compliance in and of itself, as I mentioned before, should be sort of like a foundation or a baseline towards security, just because it says if you at least have these things, then you have a baseline of security. Just a framework, a baseline. So let's get into it in a little more detail. PCI-DSS stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, because when you're using a primary credit card such as American Express, Discover, JCB, MasterCard, Visa, you look at your credit card and you see one of those symbols, those are individual companies that abide by this agreed upon standard, so that all of these internationally used and commonly used credit cards managed by these companies have a standard to follow in the first place. Essentially, without standards or rules, no one would know how to protect credit card information for companies who are processing it, and for those who are wanting to know how that information is protected, no one would know what's going on. Basically, no rules equals chaos and madness, and everyone's security, everyone's credit cards would be stolen even more than they are now. Something to note, if you look at a credit card and it doesn't say Visa, MasterCard, or one of those companies on it, and it might say Best Buy, Target, or you have a gift card, which is preloaded money, it doesn't have to follow the PCI DSS standards for security. Basically, protecting those cards is a little different. And on top of that, if you're using, say, a Target credit card that's not a Visa card, and it's one of those retail use this at Target only cards, there are fewer people out there who are like, oh yeah, I'm going to steal this credit card because I can go buy whatever I want. And they're like, oh, I can't use that anywhere other than Target. So it makes it less enticing. So security restrictions are not quite the same. Moving on to these security rules, PCI has 12 main rules. For companies who have to abide by PCI, aka companies who process credit card information, the first 3 rules are they have to have a firewall, something called a firewall. This video is not about firewalls, so we won't get into too many details about that. But companies cannot use default passwords on systems like servers and computers, especially something that is protecting data or contains data or even has access to data or data associated with payment card information flowing through it. And the third PCI rule is that you have to protect stored card data, which seems obvious, but it's a little more complicated than it might look on the surface. The fourth requirement of PCI DSS is data must be encrypted. Companies need to use antivirus and maintain the antivirus. They have to develop and secure systems and applications, restrict access to the card data on a need-to-know basis for who can actually access the data. Do you need to know what's going on with the payment card information, or do you need to access it for a specific reason? If the answer is no, you can't touch it. And also, every single login in the entire company for all users, especially with anything associated with the payment card system, the login access has to have unique login IDs, which is very important. for rule number 9, physical access to cardholder data also needs to be restricted, which is also why you might see card scanners and whatnot locked down or bolted down, and rooms with data centers and whatnot or servers are locked, and access is heavily restricted where there is payment card information. The 10th PCI rule is that companies need to monitor all network access and activity on a constant basis. They have to regularly test systems and processes that they use to protect your credit card information, and they also have to maintain an information security policy, which that policy goes into how users do things, cybersecurity practices, everything else beyond compliance. So that's what I'm going to share for now. In a future video, I'll talk a little more about some of the challenges for actually meeting those standards and requirements. At a glance, they look pretty straightforward and pretty simple. However, when you start working with something like PCI, there's so many little details behind every single one of those controls. Quite frankly, for every single one of those 12 rules, there are little tiny sub-rules, and there are hundreds of them. So, following these 12 simple rules to keep your credit card information safe is not quite as simple as it might sound. And as you can see, on Rule 12, it dictates that we need to have security practices and standards, and that's where we start to get into a need for actual cybersecurity and why those jobs exist and why it's a separate industry overall. And nowadays, if you go and start applying for jobs and look around to see what's out there, you'll notice that some jobs for compliance and cybersecurity, they want you to have both knowledge sets and the skills to be able to work with both. So the world's shifting, the world's changing. People are forever trying to figure out how to keep data safe. And so, in the next video, I'll probably go ahead and talk more about what are some of the challenges to actually trying to keep that information safe. Since this video is a lot to take in and took a little longer than I expected to make, just because I was like, wait a minute, PCI is so complicated, I can't just tell people everything. Where can we start? It's chaos. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, feel free to give me a like, and if you like my videos in general, feel free to subscribe for more.